This morning we're talking about kind of part 2 of being with God. How many of you remember your early years of marriage? Anybody? You remember? Okay, hopefully you remember your early years of marriage. I know some of us were trying to forget the early years of marriage because it wasn't quite everything it was cracked up to be, right? Like that was the story of my world. Get married and you find out that you married somebody completely opposite of you. Anybody else come into that reality? Where there's you and then there's them and you think this is going to work and then there's days that you're going, what did I do? This can't work. How is this going to work, right? I remember like when Chris and I got married, it was like we were like polar opposites. In fact, I think I told her that one day. Not a great thing to say. It's like, baby, I just like doing this and you don't. Like everything that you thought life was supposed to be, like you thought, perfection, this is going to be so great. And all of your fairy tales come crashing to a halt like the week after your honeymoon. And you're just like, well, all right, reality has struck. I remember there was that one time that we sat down and we talked about love languages. I hate those things. I don't understand them. She read a book on it. I got the Cliff Notes from her. She's explaining love languages. And this time of trying to figure out why we see things differently and why we're opposites, right? Well, it was because apparently I had the gift of like, let's go do something. And she had the gift of quality time. You know what I'm talking about? How many of you are quality time people out there, right? Like that's your love. Have you read the book? All right, you've read the book. Everybody else is like, I hadn't read the book, Dustin. There's this thing called love language, right? Like quality time is one of them. Acts of service is one of them, right? Like hers was quality time. And I remember sitting with her one time. She told me that. She's like, Dustin, I'm about quality time. I said, so what you're saying is that you want to sit on the couch and stare lovingly into each other's eyes. And just stare. Quality time, right? Like I don't get energized on quality time. I get energized with noise and activity and fun and excitement. Let's go do this. Let's go do that. We'll do it together. Let's go bungee jump together. She's like, that's not my language. I'm like, well, let's make it your language, right? Like I wanted her to change. Come be a part of my language. But I wanted nothing to do with her language, right? Because the moment that, right, like I stoop into that language, all of a sudden you start getting in touch with feelings and emotions, and you start getting transparent, and you start getting to know one another, and you're like, but I don't know that I wanted to know that. And so it was hard. Now fast forward years, right? Like, thank God that we're not that way anymore, or I'm not that way anymore. My life has flipped as I have learned and discovered, man, what quality time is about. What alone time is about. When you're with someone, right? Like I know sometimes like, man, I just want to be with Kristen. I want to be with her. I just want to sit with her. And sometimes my kids are like, stop. Just go away. This is gross. Quit touching each other. Quit. And I'm like, but I love your mom, right? Like the idea of going on a vacation with her. Man, I love that idea. I don't want to go to the beach with my kids. I'll go to the mountains with my kids. I don't want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach with my wife because you know what I love doing with her? I love sitting on the beach in a chair, and we don't even have to talk to each other. We just sit there. And I'll reach over and I'll grab her hand, and she'll reach over and grab my hand, and it's like, this is good. This is great. I want to be with her. She wants to be with me, I hope. No, she does. We talked about it. We want to be together, alone, so that we can know each other, we can talk with one another, we can get to know one another. Here's the reality. I think that is a pretty solid picture of what God intended for us and him. This idea of, man, God, I just want to so be with you, alone with you. Listen, when I want to be with my wife, when I want to hang out with her, when I want to sit on the couch, yes, and just watch a movie, or we just want to be together, right? Like when there's interruptions that come into that, They frustrate me. I'm like, no. I don't want. I want to be with you, and now there's other things that are coming in, and they start taking over that alone time that I want to be with Kristen, and I don't like it. In that same fashion, our alone time with God should be such the desire of our hearts that when there are any distractions that get in the way of that silence and that solitude where we are with God, alone with God, man, when that's interrupted, it should bother us. It should disrupt our time. Listen, this morning, like for some reason, like I always on Saturday nights, I set my alarm so that I can get up early because I know I need to be with God before I do this. And this morning I had a panic moment because apparently my alarm had been going off for literally an hour, but I turned the volume down so low and I just started dreaming about like these noises in the background. And I finally kind of like I literally laid there just going, that is the weirdest noise that my fan is making. Wait a minute, that's not my fan, right? And I look over at my phone and it says 6:20, and I had my alarm set for 5:30 because I wanted time to be alone with God. And that's not, hey, look at me, look what I do. I need that. I have to have that. I long for that because I know that this time right here is very dependent upon my time with Him. Just Him. And so I had to fast forward that a little bit this morning. Listen, those quiet, solitary moments with God are where He shapes and transforms us into what He's created us to be. Those quiet, solitary moments with God. Now, here's the beauty of it, right? I loved how Randy kicked us off. It was beautifully said. This is not a series about how we try to get God to show up. God is around us. He is with us. That's the beauty of this season, right? Like we talk about Emmanuel, God with us. He is with us. Matthew 28, He made it very clear. I am with you always to the ends of the earth. This is why I think this series is so critical for us and what this journey is all about. The problem that we face today as apprentices of Jesus is not the absence of God, but it's our lack of awareness of His presence. It's not that God's not there. It's that we don't slow down sometimes long enough to acknowledge that He's there. He's with us. In every step, in every moment, He is with us. And our hope is that through studying God's Word, through what we're talking about today in silence and solitude and alone time with God, that we would create these spaces where we become more aware of God's presence. We become more aware of His kingdom in real time with us. That's what this is all about. Here's my suggestion for us this morning. Could it be that silence and solitude have less to do with emptiness and more to do with creating space for God to fill that space and operate in our lives? A place where you and God meet in the quiet of the moment, even if there's not much talking and doing. Because we're good Christians sometimes. And we look at sometimes the silence and solitude and alone time with God as that's the space where we begin to check off all of the Christianese things that we do. In hopes that maybe that will foster some kind of affection or some kind of witness with God in our doing. And not just our being. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of doing inside of silence. We'll talk about that. But maybe not so much what we think sometimes it's really about. Listen, at the start of Jesus' ministry, right after He was baptized, right? Like there's this picture of Jesus, He gets baptized, right? And right after that, we have an incredible story. And it's actually a story about Jesus. You probably have heard it, right? It's where He goes into the wilderness. I've had like a whole new awakening to this whole understanding of what Jesus was doing. Let's just pick up and look at Matthew 4, starting in verse 1. It says this: then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. And here's the reality. Jesus didn't take a wrong turn that landed him in the wilderness. Jesus was led into the wilderness. In fact, that's a really powerful word. It means he was thrown into the wilderness. Because that's where he was supposed to be, right? Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. That word for wilderness is a very interesting word, okay? And in the Greek, it's the word eremos, okay? Now, here's what eremos means. It doesn't mean exactly what we think it means, right? Like we see this, and maybe some of your translations say wilderness, and maybe some of them say desert. And so we immediately think that Jesus was thrown into this barren wasteland, full of sand, it's hot, and it was there that he was going to fast and be tempted, right? Like that's kind of our mindset. Now, based on the cultural area, it probably was a pretty dry space, okay? But the idea of eremos carries way more meaning for us even today that we're supposed to follow along with, right? A wide array of understandings. Yes, it means desert place. It also can mean deserted place. It can mean a desolate place. It can mean a solitary place, a lonely place, a quiet place, which is kind of the one that I hold fast to, right? Or it can mean the wilderness. I've always viewed this story in almost kind of like an earthly sense. Jesus goes into the wilderness and he doesn't eat and he doesn't drink for 40 days. So what do we begin to think? Oh, woe is Jesus. 40 days. We go like 3 hours without food or water and we're freaking out. If you're a teenager anyway. But a day, 2 days, 3, he gets to 20, he's still going, right? So I've had in my mind almost this kind of awareness of like this weak and fragile Jesus. I mean, doesn't it make sense that the enemy would come when you're the weakest, when you're fragile? I mean, that's how we kind of have taught this story. He comes after us when we hadn't eaten for 40 days and 40 nights, right? When we're at our lowest point. But here's what I began to think through. Jesus wasn't weak during this time. In fact, he was probably at the pinnacle of his strength and power. Why? Because he was alone with God. He was with God. No, he didn't have food and he didn't have drink. But what did he have? He had God. And that's what he sought after. Listen, this place of wilderness isn't this place of weakness. It's a place of strength. I think so often, like we look at the times of wilderness in our own lives and we just go, oh man, those are like the weakest times in my whole life. Like I dread being in those wilderness times. I dread being in those lonely, isolated times. Like I don't want to be there because that's the weak place. And if the enemy shows up in that weak place, then how am I going to make it? Until we realize that that is the place that we have to value. Jesus valued the eremos. Why? Because he valued time with God. He wanted to be with his Father. Look at Mark chapter 1. We're not going to go into it. I'm just going to highlight it for you, right? One of the longest chapters of Jesus' story life, right? Like we read these. Mark chapter 1, dude, he's like brought into ministry and immediately like he's just like bam, 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 to do. He's healing people. He's calling his first disciples. Casting out demons. Staying up late. He does all of this, and then the next morning, we pick up in Mark chapter 1, verses 35, and this is what he says. And after rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. A desolate place. What's that word again? Eremos. Quiet, lonely, isolated. He wanted that. Doesn't it make sense? And doesn't it make sense how we operate though in that situation? Like we have a busy work day, like take your busiest church day. Or maybe for you, it was this past week, it was just, Thanksgiving was just boom, 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 boom. You just had lots of family, lots of stuff, and you're just like, I can't wait till Friday because I'm going to sleep till 11. And then I'm going to get up and have my coffee. Like, would it make sense for Jesus to sleep in that next morning after all of the work that he's done? Get up, have his spot of tea, maybe go on a little morning stroll, getting his life amped and ready because he knows it's going to start again. But no, what does he say? He's working hard, and then he's like, I got to get up. I need to get up before anybody else does because if I don't, they're coming. You know that he had people waiting at his door. He gets up early and he goes away to the Eremos to be with his Father, to enjoy time with him alone. Let's take a crazier story of aloneness. You ever read the book of Hosea? There's this really cool verse in the middle of Hosea chapter 2, right? Let me give you a backstory of Hosea. Hosea is all about unfaithfulness, the unfaithfulness of the Israelites. They seek after God, then they're like, oh, shiny object. And they go after that. Well, he tells the story of unfaithfulness through a guy named Hosea, right? And a woman named Gomer, right? So he tells Hosea, you're going to go marry Gomer. And she's going to be unfaithful to you. But you're going to stay with her. Even through hardships, you're going to stay with her. And he does. And it's God's way of showing what it looks like for him to chase after, to continue to love his people, even in their unfaithfulness. That's a beautiful picture of our Father in heaven. You are unfaithful. I'm going to chase after you. But I love it because in Hosea 2:14, listen to what he says. Therefore, behold, I will allure her, talking about Israel. I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. Now, is that not like a flashbang of a difference between what we think about wilderness and what God was intending about wilderness, the Eremos? Especially when you're talking about unfaithfulness. For us, that Eremos is like, what did I do wrong? How did I get myself into this? This is punishment. Go sit in the corner, be quiet, nobody can talk to you. And yet we have this picture of God saying, I'm going to allure her into the Eremos, and I'm going to what? Speak tenderly. I'm going to show compassion. I'm going to love. I'm going to be gentle and lowly. The wilderness, listen to me. The place of solitude, the place of silence is not a place of punishment here, but a place of intimacy and renewal where God removes distractions and speaks directly into the heart. A place of silence, a place of solitude. Listen to this. Being alone with God is about being brought into a place where distractions can be removed and where he can speak directly to us. Being alone with him. Go back to Mark 1. He comes out of that crazy first day. He starts walking back to the house. His disciples run up. Where have you been? Like, everybody's looking for you, dude. Like, there's a line of people already ready to be healed and demons to be cast out. Like, they need you, Jesus. And I love his response. Listen to Mark 1:38. Listen to what he says. And he said to these disciples, hey, they're looking for you. Here's what he says. Let us go to the next towns. It wasn't even, sweet, let me go do my work. He said, let's go. Why? That I may preach there also, for that is why I came. He goes into the airmost, and what does he come out with clarity with? He comes out with clarity around his identity and his calling. Not that he was confused by that. But even in that moment, man, of his strength, being with his Father, he was reminded, Jesus, this is why you're here. You're going to continue to go. There's a message that needs to be proclaimed. There's hope that people need to hear. That's why you've been sent. So he comes back and he tells his disciples, this is what we're doing. Where did he discover that? Alone with the Father. He wanted it. He longed for that. He knew that he would stay the course when he did that. Alone with him. In quiet moments with God is where we gain a better vantage point. Man, we talk about that. That's who we are. In that alone time with God, you want to know where you see better? You want to know where your clarity of vision becomes sharper than ever? When you're alone with him. Think about your marriage. When you're alone, intimately, having fun, you name it, when it's just the two of you, don't you discover better who they are? Don't you discover more clearly how you guys are together and how you're supposed to be together? You understand how you fit and how they fit and how this is a team. You understand that? And then you understand clearly and better how to live this life as this married couple. Should that look the same in our intimacy with him as we're alone with him? Can I tell you maybe the reason why we struggle with understanding who he is and who we are and the life we're called to live is because we never find ourselves alone with him long enough to see it, to hear it, to know it. So it comes in intimacy with the Father, alone with him. It was there that Jesus went. Listen, he was prepared in the desert. He comes out of the desert and ministry begins. He was prepared. He was renewed. He was comforted. Jesus went into those isolated, quiet spaces. Listen when I say this. Silence and solitude weren't optional for Jesus. They were essential for maintaining intimacy with the Father and clarity in his mission. They were necessary. Listen, quiet times, your eremos, they're not luxuries. They're necessities for anyone who wants to live a life of intimacy with God. In fact, I was talking with Randy this past week about this, and we came to this conclusion that our time that we spend alone with God says something about our love for him. And your time alone with your spouse, time alone with your kids, time alone with best friends, doesn't that say something about, your connection? Doesn't that say something about your love? I want to be with you. I will sacrifice to be with you. I will go above and beyond to make sure this works because I want to know you. So if you just looked, and this is going to sting, this is going to burn a little bit, okay? If you just looked back at the last 3 days of your life and you saw the amount of airmost time that you spent with the Father, what would it say about your passion for him? I know, that's not fun to think about. But church, that's how we have to start thinking about our walk with the Lord. We can't just maybe this anymore. We got to start asking some deeper, harder questions like, are we really walking this out? Are we really living this stuff out? So if we look back at our life, we look back at our week. I mean, we had a week off, so many of us, right? Teachers. How was your alone time? It's not a luxury, necessity. So if these are critical, so let's talk practical for a second. If these are critical to our walks, then why do we avoid these times of silence and solitude in our walks with God? Why do we avoid them? Why do we avoid alone time with God? I've got a couple fears, and I have a couple things that I think that we do. Number one, I think we fear introspection. We fear getting alone with our thoughts. We fear thinking about maybe our past. We fear thinking about where we are. We fear thinking about maybe the emotional trauma that we're in, the physical trauma that we're in. So we slow down enough and we get to that place where we're just like going, I don't want to think about these things. I'd rather just be oblivious to that, right? Like I don't want to think about my marriage and how hard it is and maybe the struggles that I'm having that's causing the struggle in my marriage. We don't want to think about that. We'd rather busy our lives so much so that we don't have time to think. You know the one thing that David welcomed? I love it, man. This dude just prayed dumb prayers sometimes. Psalm 139, search me, O God, and know my heart. That's a scary prayer. Here I am, God. Just search me. And if there's anything in me that's not of you, show me. So that I can deal with it. Now, David didn't love alone time sometimes. There was moments where David was just like, where are you, God, right? Like, you're so far away. Because that's what he's feeling. But introspection, we fear that. Listen, here's a fix to that so that you can just have some hope. God doesn't expose us to condemn us, but to transform us. You think that God's just some big God up there that's just going, let's just talk about all your junk. Let's talk about all the trash in your life. Let's just bring it all into existence, and then we'll just point and stare at it, right? No, he brings that all out so that he can transform us. He can make us more like him. Okay, number two, fear of feeling alone. Solitude can be mistaken for loneliness. People fear that in silence, God might seem distant. You ever been in that place where like you're alone with God, he's not talking, you're not talking, and you're just like, I don't like this. I'm by myself. So we fear feeling alone. And here's the crazy part. Eremos, solitude, quietness is not about being alone, but being alone with God. It's an awareness. Alone with God. Elijah, in probably his deepest, darkest alone time where he felt like he was abandoned by everybody. In fact, he said, God, where is everybody? You said that there were going to be remnants. Where are they? And it was in that moment where he's feeling alone and by himself that God goes, let me tell you something. You're not alone. It's where he began to speak to him. He began to say, yes, no, there is a remnant of people that are going to be raised up and you're going to be with them. You're going to lead. But he had to go to that place of Eremos where he thought, man, it was all about a lonely time, but really it was about a witness with God. In a quiet space. Number three, it's going to hurt. We have an addiction to distraction. Y'all, it's an addiction. Chemically speaking, it's an addiction. We have dopamines that fire in our brains the moment that things come our way that we like and distract us, and we go, ooh, this is great. And so when we feel lonely and isolated, what do? We go out and we try to raise up those dopamines. Let me go out and try to excite those dopamines in my life so that I can feel good about me, right? So we're addicted to doing stuff all the time. That's my life. That's me. But stillness leads to knowing God deeply. What does Scripture say? Be still. Literally speaking, stop. Stop moving. Don't move anymore. Be still and know that I'm God. Don't do anything. Stop. Distraction prevents intimacy. Could be why marriages are struggling. You're too distracted to act like a married couple. I'm not jumping on that bandwagon yet. Number 4, discomfort with God's voice. If we get alone with God, what are we afraid of? What is he going to ask me to do? What's he going to say that I'm not going to like? So we get uncomfortable. God's voice, even when convicting, brings life and hope. Even in the conviction, even in the hard words that he has with us, it's to transform us and to bring us life and life to the full. That's what this is about. So these are maybe some fears or some thoughts that we have, the reasons why we do that. But let's talk about this. Let's talk about misunderstandings about how God uses silence and solitude. Let's talk about, what God intends and maybe what we think that keeps us from wanting to run into, chase after, long for alone time with God. Number 1, ready? We think that alone time, silence time, the eremos, that time of quietness, we think it's about isolation. You think it's about we got to get away. And the problem with that is some of us, we love that. Don't give me anything. Give me separation from everybody. Don't talk anymore. I'm fine in my corner. But a lot of us, we struggle with that, right? We get in that isolated place. But we think that that's what this is about. God just wants you to be lonely. So he gives us those moments of loneliness. Listen, here's the reality behind it. Solitude with God is actually relational. It's not about who can be the quietest. You and God are not playing the quiet game here. It's a place that you can get still long enough where you can actually enjoy the intimacy with the Father. We shared the story about the monk. Some of you guys have read this story in one of the books that I've been talking about. He asked a monk, what do you do when you're alone? Talk about these monks that go out and just spend time by themselves. They don't talk to anybody. They don't do anything. They just they're there. And it's like, what do you do? And his response was what? I am here with God, here with me. I'm being with God, being with me. I am loving God, loving me. I'm sitting still with God, sitting still with me. And that's good. That's good. Listen, it's not isolation so that our minds can be emptied. It's actually relationship so that our minds can be full of Him and knowing Him. Number 2, we see it as passive. We look at silence and solitude as inactivity. It's about doing nothing. I don't know if you've ever been in a time of solitude and silence with God. It is anything but passive. Jesus, in his silence and solitude with God, he fought. He fought the enemy. In our times of silence and solitude, it's not just about actively doing nothing. Man, it is about taking captive your thoughts because it's a war. It's a battle. You want to know that this is a battle? Set forth time this week to go be silent with God. And you will find just about how many distractions pop up that you have to fight through to stay faithful to being alone with God. It's setting your minds on the things above. These are all things that we do in the midst of being alone with God. So it is anything but passive. In fact, these moments create space for God to do work in us, to renew us. In that silence and solitude, we find ourselves confessing. We find ourselves repenting. We find ourselves worshiping. We find ourselves exalting. Because we're alone with the creative one who created everything, who is beautiful and powerful and big. And we just go, God, you're so good. It's not passive. It's anything but that. It's work. Number 3, we expect immediate results. God, I've been sitting with you for 15 seconds. Come on now. I know. But we do that. Listen. You may value this. Tomorrow you may be like, you know what? I want silence and solitude with God. I want to seek after that alone time with God. And tomorrow you may sit down and just be like, that was the biggest waste of 5 minutes. Because you didn't see something crazy and miraculous. There wasn't like some spark. There wasn't some ignition. There wasn't some goosebump raising moment that now you're like, yes, silence is so good. Here's what you need to know. God often works over time in solitude to shape character and deepen trust. It took Jesus 40 days and 40 nights. He works in time. Number 4, we kind of talked about this already. We fear that it's punishment. Silence feels like abandonment, distance from God. I remember one time, and I told you guys, I'm an open book about this kind of stuff. I called Caleb, and I was just like, bud, I am struggling right now. I work from home, so I do a lot of my work in the morning times alone by myself. And let me tell you something, it's a battle. And one morning, I was struggling hard. And I called Caleb, and I was like, bud, I need some help, dude. Like, I'm struggling with this. And he just goes, bro, just sit there and enjoy the silence and alone time with God. I'm over there screaming, God, where are you? This is miserable. What did I do? And Caleb's reminded me, hey, it might be that this is just where God wants you to be so that you can just spend some time with him. So why don't you enjoy this? Sit in the moment. Slow down. And I did. And it was good. But I needed to be reminded of that. It's not punishment. Oftentimes in solitude is often where God prepares his people for their next steps. You got some big steps taken right now? You need to be getting alone with God. So where do we go from here? This is quick and easy. I didn't want to make this a big 1, 2, 3, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. I wanted to keep it super simple. I'm just going, okay, so what do we do now? Number 1, ask yourself, what is keeping me from being alone with God right now? What's keeping you from being alone with God? It's a real question. Why do you dread it? What are you afraid of? What are you anxious about? What are you nervous about? Are you too busy? Are you afraid that he's just going to bring up everything from your past so that you can flesh it all out again? What's in the way? Number 2, invite God into whatever is keeping you from wanting to embrace silence and solitude and alone time with him. Are you afraid of him? Tell him. Are you anxious about what he might say? Invite him into that. God, I'm afraid of what you're going to tell me. I'm afraid of what you're going to dig up. God, this scares me to death to be alone with you because I don't know what you're going to do. Invite him into that. Are you overstimulated by noise and distraction? Is that your flaw? Invite God into that. Ask God to give you a calm spirit. Ask God to give you the peace that you need so that you can operate the way He's called you to operate, to be in that alone time with Him. Are you like me and you're ADD off the wall? And alone time with God sometimes feels impossible? Can I tell you one of my prayers? Be the stimulant that my brain needs to slow down. I have prayed that. God, I need you to be my medication because it's not working right now. I've prayed that prayer. It sounded dumb in the moment until God answered it. I brought Him into what I was feeling. I brought Him into my fear. I brought Him into my concern. I brought Him into my inability. And He said, thanks. This is where I operate. Helping you want to be with me. Number 3, practice simply being with God, being with you. I'm going to ask the band to come down. Stay focused with me. Practice simply being with God, being with you. And listen, this is a faith thing. This is you walking into your time alone with God, carved out, set apart. This time, right? For me, that's my office. I shut the door. I've got this weird app that I play weird music on that helps my weird brain focus. I don't listen to worship music because that just leads me to go, I don't like that one. I like this one. Let me go to this one. I'm tired of that one, right? I do that. So what do I listen to? Come up and ask afterwards. It's brilliant. It's frequencies that are played on my phone that I play very loud on my speaker, and people walk in and go, what are you listening to? I'm just like, just don't worry about it. It is probably the biggest hype, nothing. But if it works, it works. And I come into that moment and I sit there and I know, God, you're here because you said you would be. God, I want to be. And God, I'm going to fight through wondering, are you here? God, I'm just going to sit here being with you. Would you be with me? Make me aware. And you may sit there for 2 minutes. And you may come back tomorrow and sit there for 2 minutes. For the next 2 weeks, you may sit there quietly for 2 minutes. And in the third week, you may finally start realizing how much God has been with you and how much He's actually said. Which leads me to my 4th point. Once you start, don't stop. I wish I could say that I had the same addiction that Jesus had to wanting to be alone with God. And I wish I could say that my wanting to be alone with God was as bad as my wanting to be alone with my wife. It's not, because I struggle. Things come up, distractions happen. But I have been alone with Him enough that it's what I want. This morning when I was fighting tooth and nail to get dresses, now I know why God got me my outfit figured out last night. He was already preparing me to have some moment with Him this morning. Alone. Quiet. With Him. And I want that. And I don't stop. And let me tell you something. When I don't have that alone time with God, I feel it. I know it. Because it feels like something is missing. And that's how it should feel. It might be a problem. This might sting. If you don't have moments where you feel, man, I'm missing God right now. If in your day, you don't have those moments where you're just like, man, I just need to get quiet for a minute. 2 Timothy 2:1, you then, my child, be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus. I think we're about to sing that, right? About God's grace. Look at my face when I tell you this. And I'm speaking from sheer firsthand responsibility here. You will not be able to do this on your own. So it's a good thing that we have God's grace that is sufficient when we're not. And we get to lean on him with everything that we have so that we can walk in those alone moments with him so that we can become the people that he wants us to be. Amen? Let me tell you something. And there's people in here that this applies to. You don't have a relationship with Jesus, okay? Just because you've grown up in the church and just because you've been here for a long time does not seal you as a follower of Christ. It's not until you receive his grace and allow that to transform your life, then you're operating in him, not yourself. And so if you feel that in your guts right now, and you're doing everything that you can do to try to turn that off, stop. Cease moving. And know that you have a God that's going, hey, you, I love you. Come with me into the airmost so that I can speak lovingly over you. You want that? Do you want that? You tired of trying to figure out how to do this on your own? Stop. You're not gaining any ground. Jesus is what you need. A relationship with him where you put your faith in him. You trust him to give you life to the full. So here's the invite. You ready? Here's the invite. You've been playing a game, looking religious, but not in a relationship. I'm going to invite you to come into that. I want you to bow your heads for a moment. I want you to spend some airmost time right here in the midst of everybody else in a quiet moment listening to him. Here's who I'm talking to. You tired of trying to figure this out on your own? And you're ready to be in a relationship to a loving, inviting Father that welcomes you into his presence. Broken and all. I don't care what you have brought into this room. I don't care what you've done in your past. Jesus says, come on. I deal with that stuff. I work through all that. Is that you? I'm going to ask you to be as brave as you could possibly be. If that's you, I want you to look up here at me. You're like, Justin, I don't have a relationship. You? We've been praying for you. Who else? I want you to make it clear. I want to see your eyeballs. That's you. It's about a relationship. Who else? Stay looking. Don't lose track. If I hadn't confirmed with you, wave at me because I want to know. Okay. Those of you who are looking at me right now, you're fixing to step into the most incredible relationship with the Father. In fact, I think he's already moving. He's already brought you here. You've been asking so many questions already. It's not a mistake. It's the airmost. It's the place he welcomes you into a quietness with him and says, my daughter, I love you so much. He wants that for you. He wants that for you. So I'm going to invite you right now, if that's you, if this is you right now, I want you to bow your head. You don't even have to. There's nothing magical about bowing your head. It's just a place of getting quiet with him. And just simply say, God, thank you for luring me into your quiet space so that I could know you.